Namaste. Let me start with a question. How many of you here are teenagers? Yeah, thank you. And how many of us are parents of teenagers, including me? Yes, what a world it is. I have twins, 18-year-old just now, this year, a few weeks back, lived through the teenagers. It is fun. It's a lot of storm and growth and development. As a mother, I knew that post-pandemic, we've gone through a lot of difficulties, challenges. We've seen loss of finances, loss of health, loss of jobs, a lot of things, right? And as a mental health professional, working on both sides, looking at personal losses, looking at losses from my patients, it was very alarming for me as a mother and as a psychologist that where am I leading my children to? What happens in my life as a professional where am I only looking at children, teenagers, adolescents, young adults with anxieties, depression, phobias, OCDs, you name it, you see it. And my thought was, before they get into all this, can we do something? Why can't we look at primary prevention rather than looking at having them in the clinic, in the hospital, coming in for therapy, and then trying to find a cure or trying to treat them? Can we do something else? And that's when all of these researches came up. My work with teenagers, adolescents as we would call them, brought in a lot of information, that's the teenage brain, brought in a lot of information about how the teenager's brain works. A psychologist told us that a teenager's brain is like a Ferrari with no brakes on. And you know how it is. Yes, I have two at home, a boy and girl. What happens is that there's a lot of love too. There's a lot of physical, cognitive, emotional, social changes happening. And there's absolute bomb of love. And that's where we also see the neuroplasticity. Right from the time a child, an infant is born to the time he or she or they become senior adults, there's a lot of changes happening in the brain. And we know the brains and the neurons and the synapses are kicking and throwing so much. That's the beauty of being a psychologist, looking at life in bloom. And the neuroplasticity, neuroscience shows us that teenagers can grow, evolve. And that's where, as a psychologist, as a mother, our role comes in. We know that loneliness, we've heard a lot of people talking about the next pandemic being loneliness. Of course, we have gadgets and instruments and social media and so much more to tell us that the teenagers are connected. But are they really connected? They do feel lonely. And what happens is that inner critic in them, which keeps telling them that I'm not worthy, I'm not perfect, nobody loves me. Imagine a young person having so much of darkness in their eyes, looking at life, and this inner critic, inner voice telling them that I'm not good enough. And where do I see further from here? What is the purpose of my life? What is the meaning of my life? I see kids coming in, teenagers coming in and asking me, I don't see any purpose in life. And when I want to talk to my parents, they will say, now you say you have stress? Wait for another 5 years, 10 years, you will see more stress coming in. And what are we as parents telling them? Now you have stress and your whole life is going to be stressful? Is that what as parents we want them to know? Absolutely no. We want them to have meaning in life. And that's when we thought we should start looking at initially the 3 A's. We look at awareness of what could be triggers, what could be distractors, what could be social support systems, emotional support systems, and each child is unique. Like how we know genetically the DNA is unique, each child biologically, psychologically, cognitively, emotionally is unique. And we help as parents bringing in the awareness and acknowledgement. The third A is appreciation. Of course, we know that we have to appreciate the child, praise the child, give in verbal reinforcements, which help in developing the behavior. It's not just the prizes and the talents and the competitions. It's also simple smiling, nodding, looking at them with kindness. That brings in a lot of acknowledgement and appreciation. There was a child who was talking to me who said that I don't want to live anymore because every time my birthday comes in, my parents would throw a party, there would be cakes and everything. But then I craved for that one hug. And that is all what I wanted. I didn't want the party, I didn't want the dress. I just wanted a hug. And when we had the family session and when I told the mother and the father this, there were tears. And you know, it's so heartwarming to see when parents are open to talk about this. And it's the communication which we are looking at. That's where we bring in the 3 A's: awareness, acknowledgement, and appreciation, which leads on to connect. Of course, we have connectivity talking throughout the world, but we are looking at, are we really connecting? Are we there? With so much of information, so much of noise around, are we there? Is our prefrontal cortex and dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, that is where the executive functions are, the ventral striatum where the positive emotions are, has to have a good connect. For a teenager, the limbic system, the amygdala, hippocampus, is active. But then what happens is the prefrontal cortex is not as active as the emotional mind, the limbic system. So what happens is a lot of emotions are going up and down. And social connect definitely makes it worth living. Inner critic, we just now saw, these are words. And the inner critic at one point wanted us to know that we have to do better, we need to move forward, we need to survive, so we need to be stronger either cognitively or physically. And that's how the inner critic developed. Do we really need an inner critic so much now? We hear parents telling them that unless you get 90% or unless you get this prize in the competition. Is that all their life is? What more? And that external voice becomes an inner voice for these kids. And what happens to the quality of life? So when we help the child to understand that these are just thoughts, these are just words which come into your head, these are not facts. And as parents, we help them to look at these thoughts as just words and not as facts. And that's where the child, the adolescent, the teenager is able to look at the inner critic as, okay, it's just another thought in my mind, another bunch of words. Bringing in purpose of life. And purpose of life is not what I as a parent want my child to be. It is what the child wants to be. The child has creativity, the child has sports in his or her blood, child wants to get into reading and writing a book. Yes, that is what the child and the teenager growing into a young adult grows into. Where are we looking at that instead of bringing in competition? I wanted to be a doctor, so my child has to be a doctor. Is he or she actually going to be happy there being a doctor? And we see a lot of people changing careers later on. So we also do aptitude assessment. There are times I've wondered, 25, 35 years, and then you're coming in now to check for aptitude assessment? You should have done it much earlier. But then unfortunately, that's not done. Right? And that's where we also look at meaningful conversations. Many times what happens is, this also happens in my clinic, where children come in, teenagers come in and say, I want to have meaningful conversations. I want to open up and talk about aspects like gender identity, physical intimacy. But as soon as I start talking, my parents either way, they walk away or they change the topic, or they tell me you should ask your biology miss about all this. What is the impression we are giving them? Is this a taboo subject? That does not stop their curiosity. The difficult part is that they start looking at other places. It could be their friends or it could be the internet. And that's the most difficult place because we know the dark wide web can give them misinformation, right? And many times it need not be always saying no to them. It could be a frown, it could be a smirk, that why are you talking about this at this time? And that stops them. It's like a wall there which prevents the child, the teenager, to open up. So let's also be, as parents, be mindful about our body language. And that is where we take up responsibility. Not only about physical health, also mental health. And as parents sitting here, as adolescents sitting here, I know you would agree with me when I say physical health is important. I would also want you, and I know you would agree that mental health, psychological health is equally important. That's where we look at the emotional toolbox. This is an idea which we came up, psychologists, where we looked at toolbox, which we always use in any profession. We look at 4 main activities, strategies here, because we know adrenaline, cortisol levels go up. Those are the stress-related neurochemicals when there is a lot of unhealthy emotions coming up. So we also need to compensate that. So what do? Physical strategies: move, walk, run, play, jog, dance, anything. Let the endorphins come in. Bring in the endorphins. Social strategies: connect, interact, meet, talk, not just on the internet, on the Instagrams, on the Snapchats, also in real life, IRL. That's what my son says. Right? It took a while for me to understand what IRL is, but I know the teenagers would know what that is. Yeah. We also look at cognitive strategies. So social strategies would bring in oxytocin. Cognitive strategies would bring in a lot of dopamine, where we are learning problem solving. It could be learning to do Sudoku. It could be learning to solve a puzzle. It could be learning to do a jigsaw. It could be anything where you're problem solving. Yeah. Behavioral strategies, it could be watching something together or reading a book, listening to music. We're looking at serotonin. We can do this alone, individually. We can do this as a combination. So when you sit with your child, listening to music, playing a game, it could be a board game, it could be a sport game, it could be anything, you are bringing in all of these pleasant, healthy neurochemicals. And that is what we bring in as parents to help the child, the teenager, to move ahead in life. What happens here is that we know life is difficult and we would want all possible things to be done for our teenagers so that they grow into being healthy adults. So let me take about 10 seconds of your time more before I conclude, where I would want all of you, parents and adolescents, teenagers, to just be there with your breath. Breathing in, breathing out. It could be any thought, any feelings, any emotions, any sensations on your body. That's fine. Just be with your breath. And as you breathe in and breathe out, also feeling being here at this point. Thank you very much.